January 11th, 2006. The Hubble Space Telescope captures a never-before-seen image of the Orion Nebula, a massive star formation 1,500 light-years from Earth. The panoramic photo reveals more than 3,000 stars in various stages of life and gives researchers new insight into the formation of celestial objects and planetary systems. According to modern scientists, it is here, in this mysterious cloud of dust and gas, that stars and planets may have been created billions of years ago.
Astronomers usually refer to it as M42, not such a sexy name, but it's a stellar nursery. It's where stars are being born. And so this part of Orion gets a lot of study by astronomers.
You have this rapid star-forming region. You have these young stars and very likely many, many young planets that also form out of that gas and dust that collapse to make those stars in the Orion Nebula.
Now, stars being born obviously means that certain things are happening there on a level which we simply don't really understand.
As seen from Earth, the Orion constellation is one of the most prominent star formations in the night sky and has been revered by ancient cultures around the globe for thousands of years. Named after the Greek demigod Orion in the 8th century BC, when connected, the stars form the head, shoulders, belt, and feet of a man.
Orion is probably one of the most recognizable constellations in the sky, maybe only second to the Big Dipper. It's near the equator, and in the northern hemisphere, it's visible in the winter. It has a lot of bright stars in a big square. That's the body of Orion.
The three major stars in the constellation are Alnilam, Alnitak, and Mintaka. These are the belt stars of Orion, and most people recognize the constellation by these three stars right in a row.
According to Greek mythology, Orion was a giant born with superhuman abilities. A mighty hunter who killed animals with an unbreakable bronze club. When the Greek hero was eventually slain, he was placed among the stars for eternity.
His father was, in fact, Poseidon. So he knew a lot about oceans, and Poseidon apparently taught Orion how to walk on water.
There's another story about him being so big that when he walks through the ocean, his head and shoulders are above the ocean, so get a sense of his size. All of our astronomical bodies are named after major figures from Greek mythology. We have these wonderful texts that describe stars and how it is that they got their names. To write about the stars, to write about the heavens, to write about the bodies in space is essentially to be talking about the realm of the gods.
Now, the constellation of Orion in all traditions, and particularly the Egyptian tradition, is usually regarded as a striding man. The Greeks saw him as a hunter. Many other cultures saw him as a giant.
Sometimes we have him depicted as smiting the enemy. Sometimes he is trampling across a serpent. But in each case, we know that Orion is depicted as a human being.
It's entirely possible that a character like Orion was based on an actual human being. Because we have to keep in mind that for the Greeks, what they called mythology or myth, the mythic past, was just older than ancient history.
Is it possible, as ancient astronaut theorists suggest, that Orion was named for an actual flesh and blood being? Or might there be another, more profound reason this demigod and the stars that form his body were worshipped? Some researchers believe the answers can be found by looking at the origin stories of a civilization that thrived in the Nile River Valley more than 2,000 years before the Greeks. According to Egyptian mythology, the gods descended from the belt stars of Orion and Sirius, the brightest star in the sky.
The ancient Egyptians believed that from Sirius and Orion came beings in the form of humans, Osiris and Isis, and instigated the human race. Metaphorically, it very much matches what we know from astrophysics. We know that we are the product of stars. We're literally made of star stuff.
Sirius and Orion are critically important because they represent Isis and Osiris, the god and goddess from which all of Egyptian civilization and ultimately all of human civilization supposedly sprang. So to the ancient Egyptians, Osiris was Orion. That constellation actually was a literal living embodiment of the great god Osiris, who was always over our heads, always looking down upon us, and always judging us, because in the end, he would be the guy that would decide whether we got eternal life or whether we were recycled back through the spiritual mulch and had to start all over again.
Ancient Egyptians were very clear that Orion was linked with creation, specifically magic creation. And so if we accept what our ancestors were saying, mythology all of a sudden becomes more interesting, because all of a sudden we see the truth as to what Orion really stands for. And it is all to do with creation, magical creation. And creation in those days was linked with the gods.
Orion and Osiris are the same in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed that Osiris will return from Orion one day. Every culture in antiquity had the knowledge of somebody who returns one day. We are still expecting the return of someone.
Are the creation stories of the Egyptians actually documentation of mankind's otherworldly origins, as some ancient astronaut theorists suggest? And if so, might they have left behind more evidence, perhaps written in stone? According to the pyramid texts, a collection of religious records carved into the walls of pyramids dating back to 2400 BC, the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Unas ruled for 30 years before making his final voyage to the star system Orion.
Unas, who according to the pyramid texts apparently became great by eating the flesh of his mortal enemies and then slaying and devouring the gods themselves. Some say that this was based on a belief in contiguous magic, whereby consuming the flesh of great people would bring inheritance of their powers. After devouring the gods and absorbing their souls and powers, Unas journeyed through the sky to Orion.
Might the writings in the pyramid texts actually be more than myth, as some ancient astronaut theorists believe? And could the pharaoh Unas actually have traveled into space? If so, how?
When you listen to the ancient Egyptians, they clearly tell us that the purpose of the Great Pyramid was not as a tomb, but rather as a sort of a womb of transformation. The pharaoh would enter into it as a man, and through the process of the technology that the pyramid is built for, the pharaoh is transformed into a god, so that now he is an ascended being who is capable of traveling into the stars and also returning.
They seem to have wanted to create a kind of an ancient launching pad, a sort of Cape Canaveral of the pharaohs. The idea was to build the hardware in order to somehow get the soul of the king going to these stars.
Is it possible that the pharaohs of ancient Egypt were able to travel back and forth to the stars of Orion by using the pyramids? According to ancient astronaut theorists, the proof can be found by examining an elaborate series of air shafts embedded within the Great Pyramid. Air shafts that point directly to the stars of Orion and Sirius.
There is definitely a lot of scientific data that has shown that the pyramid, the entire Giza Plateau, the alignments of the air shafts from the King's and the Queen's chamber are all pointing to Orion. And so that may be a message to us that